either.
And we are recording.
Okay, so this is going to be a casual conversation.
Okay.
My first question from the list is, if we keep a child's needs in mind, when is the optimal time for a kid to start going to daycare? I mean, can such a general statement even be made?
A general statement cannot be made, no, but and the thing is, there's a reality of a family. So, some mums have to work, and if they work, it doesn't mean their child is not going to be okay by having to attend a daycare. So I think there's two parts. I would say, first of all, it's the context of the family's needs and the child. Some children are more ready or not to be in a community. I think if a mother can keep a child until the age of 3 at home, it's wonderful. Definitely until the age of 2, because the 2 first years are so important in terms of the attachment to the mother and to the primary caregiver. However, some children start, before that and do absolutely fine, and the bond with the parent is not at all, hurt by the fact that the child is going to a community. So the other side is what kind of daycare or kindergarten the child attends. So there are places also where children thrive and where the transition from home and the relationship with the parents make it easy for the child to spend the day there. So it really depends. And then there's all sorts of formulas. Some children only go a couple of hours. But I have children who are not yet 3 who actually were coming part-time, and they're asking their mothers to be there the whole day, which means that they're happy to be here. So that's what I'm saying, that you can't really generalize. It really, there's one famous motto in the Montessori approach is follow the child. So the child tells you what they need. But I think we have to be careful also, because there's a lot of mothers who need to work, and I don't think mothers should feel guilty because their children have to go to daycare. They just have to pay attention that the environment in which the child is compatible with their child. I think that's the most important.
You kind of touched on the second question I have, which is, parents do sometimes feel guilty because they have to put the kid in a daycare of some sort. Is there anything that you could kind of advise them to make up for the time they quote unquote lose?
But I mean, the moment the child comes home, the fact that the child is involved in preparing meals and spending the rest of the day with them, I think quality time with a child is not determined by quantity. It's determined by what you actually do with the child. And my husband travels all the time. There were times where he was away for a year and a half, but he has a very strong bond with the children. So that shows that what they got from their father was very important. So again, there's no generalization. There's some children who need. I've also noticed that sometimes children need one parent or the other more at different stages of their development. So again, it's about knowing your child and observing what the child needs. And also, I think it's not unhealthy for a child to understand that their parent is not always available either, So even if you haven't been able to give that quality time, the child's going to be okay.
Such a lovely, reinforcing, empowering thing to know as a parent, especially as a parent of a young kid.
I just want to add that I have really different family setups in the school. So there's all sorts of families with all sorts of obligations. There are mothers who don't work, fathers who don't work, both parents work, some travel. So I've seen a lot of it. And the only time I see a child who really suffers is when there's an issue in the love that is perceived by the child. For the rest, children adapt and understand, and it doesn't necessarily damage them.
In your opinion, what are the key features of educational institutions in general that parents should pay attention to? So are there some green and red flags that someone who has not yet enrolled their kid in anything ever should pay attention to?
Okay, so you have to be careful with these questions, because I'm a radical... I want education to change, really, fundamentally. So whether it's here or in France or in the States, our model of education is no longer good. So we are all forced to choose institutions, mostly, that are not adapted to our children's needs. And that worries me a little bit. What worries me is that the lack of adaptability of our systems. So, I mean, the children, for me, a child should be outside a lot. A child should have a lot of hands-on exploration. A child should have a lot of, I mean, there should be people paying attention to their social-emotional development. And all those things are non-existent in traditional settings, whether they're preschools or primary schools or high schools, because the system itself, the way things have been set up, do not allow for those things to happen. Children don't go outside. They barely have playtime outside. Teachers are, you know, they're teaching 45 minutes in a row, or, you know, they have a small group of children, they move to another. They're not given the space to be able to really develop bonds with the children beyond the subject they teach. There's no space for teaching, you know, by putting your hands into very, you know, real life experiences. There's no more art in school. It's all very, very, very cognitive based. It's very knowledge driven. And so what I would say to parents is, don't choose the fanciest school, don't choose the school that has the best results. Choose a school where if you meet the teacher, you feel that this person has something special, because there are still teachers within those systems who are real teachers and have that bond, especially in primary school or in preschool. If you feel a teacher and you feel that your child connects, that's a good place for your child. And then it's your responsibility to compensate for what the educational system is lacking in the rest of their life. So I'm not sure it's a good idea to run around getting them doing all activities here, activities there. I think they should be running around in nature, climbing trees, riding bikes, reading books. They should be getting bored. They should have whole afternoons where they're bored and they pick up sticks and papers and they create their own stuff from there. They should be having conversations with the neighbors and with the grandparents and with other children that are not the same age. That's real life. That's where you learn the most, especially when you're young. And that's actually what develops the brain. So that's what I would tell parents.
How can a parent prepare their child for kindergarten?
Okay, that's also an very interesting question. I think again it depends on the child. I think what's very important, what I've noticed, is children feel secure when they know that their parents, their parents have to do something. It's not that they're just dropping them off for the pleasure of separating with them. It's like, well, mommy has work to do, and when mommy works, mommy can't be with you anyway because she has to concentrate on everything. So whatever the setup is, if you're working at home and the child has to be taken care of somebody else, or you're telling him now mommy has to work, please read your book, whatever. So the child has to know that when mommy has to do your work, now he has to go and do his work. So it's not, so they know that they have to know where their parents are and what they're doing, and that, and they have to be explained the routine, the day, so they're coming to do their work. It's their play is actually work, because everything that they do constructs their being. So they come and they're also work. Mommy and daddy go to work and we're also going to work, but mommy and daddy will come back. And this is when they come back, or is it after lunch, or it's after the snack, or so like their routine to them regularly. And it's very important. I see mothers who come, drop their kids, say goodbye. They can be a little routine, like your husband does. She comes and she closes the door, something like that. That's the easiest for the child. But parents who linger on, I can see the anxiety, and they linger on, and I love you, and mommy's going to come back, and then the child becomes anxious. So it's very important for the child to feel that you are very confident in what's happening, and that you're not anxious at all about this separation, and that it's this is how it's going to be. And if the child cries a little bit, it's actually totally healthy, and very often they calm down quite quickly if the parent just does the break. And so it's explaining to the child that they're going to go to their work. They're going to be in a place where they're going to work, where they're going to be other children, that they're going to have friends, and they're going to be working like mommy and daddy, like that's what all children do. And that they're going to be meeting teachers who are going to show them their work, and it's going to be their workplace, if you want. It's really work, and it's empowering for them to know that it's meaningful for them. Okay, that makes perfect sense. And it's not just because mommy can't take care of them. It's because mommy's work, and children have to work too. Okay, so the difference in phrasing is actually the key point in here. Yes, is what I'm taking. And really, you're right. So how do you prepare this? Explaining that having access to a proper routine. So what is the day of my child going to look like? That you know that before, so that you can take them through it. And then we have lunch, and then after that we sleep, and And then you can explain. That's why parents who want to see the setup with the child before, it's important too. So you can say, this is where you're going to drink, this is where your glass is going to be, this is where you put your shoes, this is the slippers you're going to wear in the classroom. So explaining all those very concrete things.
Perfect. This one goes for the parents-teachers communication.
Yeah.
And the question is, how can parents contribute to establishing better communication with educators or teachers? And in your experience, what would be some best practices of establishing like a healthy relationship between the two?
Well, I think it's like, and when you're getting to know people anyway, you need to give yourself the time to get to know them. So I'm very much for this informal relationship that builds over time. So I like to be at the door when parents come in the morning, or at least in the evening, so we can just exchange a few words about the day, and I can see the interaction. Parents can tell me, instead of having to write me an official email, he didn't sleep well last night, or he's not feeling very well, but I don't know if he's going to come up with a fever, or his grandfather just left and it's really hard. So all those things, it enables us to, and the same thing today at school, they had a fight, and I'll send you an email with more details, but this is what I felt. He was very vulnerable. He was super confident. He expressed how he felt, and so all these little conversations actually build trust and enable us to get to know each other better, and therefore work better together. Then we have more official streams, which are the emails. Sometimes I do have to write an email, and parents do have to send me an email with more information. And we have this platform at school, and I think other schools have similar tools, where at least for the preschool, I'm able to post pictures of the children working regularly. You have access to what they ate during the day. And actually, I think parents don't know that they can respond to that. They can also comment on the platform. Very rarely parents write on the platform, but you can send an email or comment. Or I had a parent the other day who posted a picture. He's traveling with a child, and they posted a picture just to say, this is what my child's doing. So it can become more interactive if parents want. But a lot of parents are busy too. So they're working during the day, in the evening they're with their children. It's not easy for them to also, it would be nice to have maybe evenings with parents, very informal, where we just sit on the floor and go through the material or respond to questions. But I think it's not easy for parents also to free themselves. So I try to be open to what parents ask me and suggest. I personally don't like things that are too formal, that are too imposed and formal. And also my group changes. My group of parents changes every year, so the needs are different. The children grow every year, so some years you do certain things that don't work the year after. You see, I really try to be responsive. As I follow the children, I really try to follow the parents as much as I can.
Well, that one stood out. As much as I follow the children, I follow the parents. It's Montessori as a lifestyle, I would call it. So lovely.
But it really is, because Montessori was a scientist who observed the development of the human being from zero until quite late. And she spends years and years and years observing this. And so Montessori can be applied to any age. And actually it adapts to the needs of different ages. So when we're taught, when we go to Montessori school for teachers, the way we are taught the philosophy is in a Montessori way. There is wonderful Montessori practitioners now who are implementing Montessori for people with dementia. So it's really a philosophy of human development, and it follows the different ages and stages of development of the human being. So yes, parents should be followed too. Yes, I think it's harder for parents to put their children at school than for children to be at school. Because I think we talked about, you said, I don't, it's my only window into what happens in my child's day is what she would say if she says anything, and then the pictures. So you want to trust and you want to give them space to grow, and you don't have sometimes the choice, but it's also hard to think that 8 hours a day or 4 hours a day your child is not with you, and you can't actually witness, their development. And you maybe some parents also feel disempowered. They feel like they can't contribute, So it's important to follow the parents.
In your opinion, what is the main role of the educators or educational institutions in general in the growth and development of children? Is there something specific that stands out?
Absolutely, but I think we're not meeting that need. So educational institutions have been built to transfer knowledge. And the educator's role is basically the one who has the knowledge and the one who's transferring the knowledge. And I don't think that's not what children need. There's an inner urge to learn in every human being. No human being will live a life without learning, and without learning, more and more, and deepening and expanding. The only thing they need is an environment to do so, an environment that's safe, that's rich in information, that they can interact with. And what they do need from an educator is somebody who's going to be able to observe them and understand what they need, and adapt the environment to what they need, and be there for, again, for their socio-emotional needs, but also their physical needs. So it's done the wrong way around. We don't need educators to transfer knowledge, because that we can do on our own, but we need to make sure, as educators, that the environment will provide the experience so the knowledge can be acquired, and along the way to support them. So the role of the educator is to be a mentor and a guide, and to create educational environments. As you see in this classroom, you have plenty of material. It covers a range of curriculum that goes until the 2nd or 3rd grade of primary school in this preschool, if the child wants to. And it's set up in a way that children will just want to pick up a material, go further, learn more and everything. I don't have to do anything. I can step out of the classroom. The children are still going to interact with the material. So they're going to still learn and acquire knowledge. They don't need me for that. What they need me is to create this environment, to make sure it's full of material, that it's organized in a way that is age appropriate and easy for them to use, and then I'm able to demonstrate how the material works so they know how to use it. And then I stand back and I observe, and I give an incentive, I demonstrate something new, I show them something that they maybe have not noticed, and then I see if they're tired, if they need something more, if they need a break, if they need to slow down. So I have much more space to observe their needs, because I'm not just delivering knowledge. So they're not dependent on me. Again, I've been in the classroom now since September, and I was never full-time in the classroom. So observing the children, how it actually comes alive, is fascinating to me.
Wow.
Intellectually.
I can imagine. I mean, I can't even imagine. I see the pictures and I see how focused they are. I also see how she goes to see what other kids are doing,
Yes.
and it's of interest, even just looking at what they're doing. So I always think it has to be something very mind-blowing to her to see things, even if it looks pretty simple to us adults.
But what you pointed, I just had a discussion with a mum the other day. She was saying the kindergarten keeps telling me that my son, all he does is look at other children work. So she has to redirect him so he does his work. And I wanted to tell her, but he doesn't need to. Yeah. It's okay. He's learning as much from observing others and when he wants to manipulate, he will. So it's interesting that all these things I like to explain to be able to tell people, because parents are so worried about, and I understand.
How not to mess our kid.
So much, exactly, but that's nice. Before, parents it's not that they didn't care, but they just trusted the system and that was it, which was good for certain things. And now parents are very aware. Fathers and mum, they've read, they're attentive to their kids, and that's beautiful. But then there's so much information that you get anxious,
True.
And the children are tougher than we think. They're very, very resilient, and they're doing a lot for themselves. So
yeah, I hope so. A pretty popular question.
Yep.
Well, it's a popular topic, to be exact. In your opinion, what is it that sets Montessori apart from other approaches? Is there something specific that makes it so quote-unquote popular or in demand?
I know why it is, for me, one of the most important approaches. I think it's been Montessori. Okay, I'll say this. I think Montessori was an absolutely incredible woman. She was a scientist, so she was one of the first doctors in Italy, and her whole story of becoming a doctor is a fascinating one. But then she was also, she studied all her life. She was a sociologist, she was a psychologist, she studied different fields of sciences, if you want, whilst at the same time observing the child. And she observed the child in a very scientific way. So everything she developed is through her observations. And so she actually, a lot of her discovery, so she uncovered, I was talking to you about it earlier, she observed how the human being develops from 0 to on, and she observes patterns in this development, needs in this development. So a young child has, for instance, before the age of 6, has sensitive periods where they become obsessed with, I don't know, or there's order, there's language, there's different moments, and that means that in that moment you have a window of opportunity to really learn what it is they're obsessed with. So language is between 18 months and 3, if you want. There's a huge window of opportunity there. So there are different things like that, and they're not called sensitive periods, but as you grow, the child has other needs and other. So she's observed all that through her scientific method, if you want, and and then offered an environment and a methodology that supports what the child needs in those different phases of development. So that fascinates me, and what fascinates me is that now with the development of brain science, we've been able to confirm her findings through simply observing how the brain works. So a lot of what she discovered empirically through scientific observation is confirmed by more advanced technology today. So that for me is fascinating. But she was such a personality in her own time that very, very quickly she became quite famous around the world. And I think her fame carries on. So everybody has heard about Montessori and the Montessori approach, but I don't think people really know why it's so good. And she never protected her name because she wanted her methodology. Actually, we call it the Montessori philosophy and method, but she never gave her name to her approach. She wanted it to live on and to continue growing with science as it develops. And so I think there's a lot of schools that open and use the Montessori name and are non-Montessori just for branding because it's famous. So I don't know if if it's popular really because people understand what it's all about. And actually I'm convinced it's not, because I've even had teachers who don't know what it's about and who are trained. So that's the difficulty for me, is that there are standards in Montessori which are very, very strong. And it's really based on a huge amount of research. And if it's not implemented properly, you don't get the results you need with a child. So that's why you hear very often, it doesn't work. Children are given too much freedom. They have no structure. It's the traditional school gives them structure. They really learn something. Montessori, they don't learn anything. But that's because we're not implementing Montessori properly, if that's your experience. Because Montessori is very structured. The curriculum is extremely dense. There's space to learn. And if you go to a real Montessori school, a child comes out usually with far more knowledge than they would and they're usually advanced. Not because they're more intelligent, but because they're given so many more opportunities to build on these opportunities in their development, of their natural development. So I don't know if people understand, for instance, that adolescence is the same period of development as the 3 to 6 year olds. They have the same needs. So it's a period of huge physical growth with hormonal growth, and it's a very, very, very intense social emotional development period for social emotional development. And it's the same thing 12 to 15 year olds, and they behave actually in a quite similar way, except that a 3 to 6 year old, you expect them to do certain things and they're given much more freedom in our environment because they're not important for society. It's just still preschool and it's not real learning at that time. So they're given space to do much more. In 12 to 15 year olds, they're expected to sit at a table and listen to talk, whereas what they need the most is manual work, being outside, learning, manual skills. They don't need to. So we're totally missing the needs of the child at this age because we have not understood in the traditional educational system what those needs are. So that's why Montessori should be so popular, because it responds to the real needs of the developing human being. And it's a scientific method. It's a brain-based scientific approach to the development of the human being.
Lovely. I feel like I respond to each of your answers the same way, but that's because the sentiment is essentially the same.
Thank you.
Nothing to add to.
I'm getting encouragement.
No, I mean, a lot of the things that I kind of research on my own is what it's silly to say confirm, because you have far more knowledge than I have on the topic. On so many levels, but it's nice to see that the parts that we catch as parents actually fit in the bigger picture that you are presenting now. because we only catch, since we don't go through formal education of Montessori in any way, we only catch up on things we find from different resources. But it's very encouraging to see that even those little bits and pieces can actually contribute to the development of the child, from my perspective at least.
Well, but I have to tell you that most of it is common sense. Because if you're a human being, you know what your needs are. I mean, I know that I can't sit down, however smart the person I can't sit down and listen to somebody talk more than 20 minutes without my brain going somewhere else. So I don't understand why we think that children are going to learn if you sit them down and force them to listen. And I have a lot of self-discipline. So it's common sense. And I normally, most mothers I meet, and even some fathers, who are really following their instinct as opposed to, they are actually implementing Montessori. Because it's not a revolutionary thing, it's just she sat down and observed her children. So if you're observing your children and their needs, you will probably come to the same conclusions as her, not knowing that it's how the brain develops, simply because you're responding to your child's needs. And I see it in a lot of mummies.
That's also lovely and very encouraging. But sometimes I feel that parents have learned things that they need to unlearn to be able to learn again.
Absolutely.
It can be hard.
And teachers too. It's years of unlearning.
Oh, that's probably even harder.
It's years of unlearning. I'm still unlearning.
Yeah, well, we all are, aren't we?
We all are.
So you've been involved in a lot of international initiatives and programs and educations and whatnot. And you work with Montessori in different environments, countries and whatnot. Yeah. Are there any challenges to adapting those to a local context here in Bosnia?
I think the challenges are the same everywhere. Traditional educational systems are rigid, are outdated, and they're knowledge-driven, and they're heavy in administration. And the way teachers are trained is no longer relevant. So it's the same problem in every country in the world. So you have the choice between opening up as an independent, international, free school that is under no regulation, in which case you can do whatever you want, but then parents also need to feel that you're serious and that you belong to an educational system, that you're going to have inspections, that you're going to be, somehow supervised. And if you put yourself, which is what I did, in the traditional educational system and, register yourself as such, then you're really like this all the time, and you're struggling to find a way to. So, I mean, teachers should not have to do half of what they do to respond to state demands, because teachers should be working with children. And then they should be completely trained in a different way. So, but it's the same problem everywhere. I'm training now in Norway, where they're very advanced, because there's a regulation for Montessori schools, and the Montessori schools, private schools, are financed by the state as public schools. So there's not a money issue there, which in other countries like here or even in France is the case. There's no subsidies from the state. So they're treated the same way financially. But and there's even an obligation. So if you have a Montessori school, the state requires that 50% of the teachers have a Montessori training. So so they're very strict on the standards too. So they're quite advanced. But then when you talk to the when you're on the ground there are many more Montessori schools, there are many more people being trained, but they're still having the same difficulties with the way teachers are being trained. And when you train them to the Montessori to get them to understand what it means and to change their way of working, it's complicated, and they're not motivated. Because there's a huge heritage in this educational system. It means so many different things. It's really permeated our culture at so many levels that it's very, very difficult to unravel, to be able to move on to something else. I actually don't think we can change the educational system. I think one day, I read a very interesting book by a French scientist who explained that probably the system won't ever evolve. It will die, schools will disappear very quickly. And that something else is going to...
Right.
And there are some countries where there's a huge unschooling movement happening, very courageous parents who just don't put their kids in school, and they homeschool them. And again, that's why I told you there's the natural instinct. These parents are not necessarily Montessori trained or anything, but when I follow what they do, what they're doing with their children is giving them what we would give them in a Montessori environment. So, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That explains the whole homeschooling movement in the States, at least. Yeah. I'm not sure how relevant that is in here.
I think in the UK there's quite a lot of, and then in France I heard in France is very, very rigid. They're really backwards with their educational system. But in France I think there are some homeschool communities, parents who get together to homeschool their children. So, you know, some parents take on part of the schooling, and the children still, you know, are in a community, which is also important for them. But they're not in a context that is so closed. It's a prison school.
Essentially.
I mean, I'm limited here. This is a beautiful Montessori environment, but I'm nowhere close to what I could be doing if I were given more movement.
In what sense?
In the way we teach, especially in the preschool, I have much more freedom. I have a total freedom. But in the primary school and the high school, the more you go up, the harder it is to implement Montessori. The harder it is to find teachers who want to become Montessori teachers. The more expensive it is to train people. And then, you know, the material. It requires so much of a teacher that it's very difficult to get there. And the teachers are, to be fair, the teachers are overloaded with ministry obligations that are everywhere and not only here. Because there's also the misconception that here things are worse than everywhere else. It's not the case. I mean, in France, the educational system is a disaster. It has maybe more money, but it's a disaster.
Well, that's unfortunate.
In the UK, I mean, I hear the same problems everywhere. Everywhere.
Well, hopefully then we have a revolution in the educational system by completely deleting it from the face of the earth and moving to...
There's a very interesting country. So there are many countries I haven't visited, so I can't say I know what's happening everywhere, but I was invited on an educational tour in the Netherlands, because we have a partnership with the University of Amsterdam. And so in exchange for having their students come and observe, because we have our Earth School, so the students come and, the students who are starting to become preschool Earth teachers, they come and see what we do here. And so in exchange, they invited a couple of us to visit the Netherlands, and they wanted to know what we were interested in. And I asked them if we could see the progressive schools there. And they have the government in the Netherlands, Dutch people are quite pragmatic, and they're totally aware of the fact that the educational system is not evolving. And they're, like everywhere, struggling to get it to change. At the same time, you can't destroy it completely, because there's so many, you know, there are people, lots of jobs involved, you know, you can't, I say we need a revolution, but at the same time, revolutions is difficult for a lot of people. So what they've done is that they've, within existing schools, at their various levels, they create concept schools. So, for instance, you have a high school. Let's say you have a high school. The director is given a green light to create within this high school, like another department, another school that's a concept school, and he can do whatever he wants. He can try whatever methodology. He can imagine whatever they want. And so there's these things happening, and I visited schools that were totally different. These concept schools that had completely different approaches, and I thought that's wonderful, because I'm very much a Montessori educator, but I don't believe all the system should become a Montessori system. I think, you know, there should be diversity, and if I had the choice, I would create many different types of schools and allow parents to choose what resonates with them most. So we have to get out of this monopoly of this very one-sided approach to the child. So there are countries who are trying to do things, but they're suffering from the same thing. They don't find teachers. People don't want to become teachers anymore. In certain subjects, it's practically impossible to find teachers in the STEM subjects and so on. So everybody's really struggling.
That's very unfortunate.
But it's an opportunity too. I keep telling people here, we're a small country. We could really do things. If you have to change things in the state or in larger countries, it's a bit more complicated.
Well, it's both. I mean, I can both understand that, and also I struggle to understand that, because it seems like the system here is impossible to move, let alone change.
But it's all about people.
That's true. People are.
If they really wanted, they just change the laws and that's it. But people, and the biggest opponent to the changing of the educational system is parents and children and teachers, because there's a certain comfort in having, you know, it's what you know. It's what you know. I get the question all the time, but if my child goes to Montessori, how will they adapt in another system? And I understand the question from their perspective, but from my perspective, I don't understand the question. When I was living in France, I drove kilometers to put my kids in, and all our savings were used to get them into a Montessori school, because for me there was no other option. And I knew that with that they would be better off, so I don't understand that could be a concern. I don't want my kids in a traditional system if I can avoid it. So the problem is that it's not difficult to create a school. It's not difficult to work with children.
Says the woman of 5 who runs a school and works full-time in the...
Yeah, of course it's a lot of work, but we all work. Everybody has a lot of work, and I'm not. But I mean in terms of, it's not the doing different that's difficult, it's the getting people to want to do something different that is difficult.
Yeah, that's which brings me to the actual last question from the list.
Yeah.
And it's slightly a more personal one.
Yeah.
It says, as a mom of 5 with a successful career, I dare to say so, what advice would you give to all the curious moms who might feel overwhelmed by their motherhood journey?
That I was totally overwhelmed. I was totally overwhelmed. It was very hard. I was totally overwhelmed. That it is difficult to be a mum, and that you just have to cut yourself some slack and just go with what happens. It took me time to just let go and allow things to happen organically, to understand that I will never be a perfect mum, that I made plenty of mistakes, but that my children actually needed me to be that imperfect mum, because that's how they grow. It's impossible to grow if you have a perfect mum. You need to be able to reproach things to your mom, tell your mom there are things you didn't do well. So I messed up a lot. I understood also that I had to sometimes put myself first, and it was healthier for them and for me, which took me time also, because I was a bit too sacrificial in a certain way, and that was not healthy for them either. So it was just a hard journey. It was the most beautiful, it is still, because I'm still a mom, the most beautiful journey I've had. I think I became a woman thanks to my children. I think I've learned more from them than from anybody else. I've received more love from them than from anybody else. So it's the most beautiful thing that can happen to a woman, but it's hard. It's hard, and there's women who pretend that it's easy for them, or maybe for some women it's difficult, but I think it's a hard journey, and I'm so grateful to see that women are, still having children and wanting to raise children.
I find it encouraging that you started your question with, it was hard.
Yes,
but you quit, which you didn't say, it is hard. So I'm guessing that the overwhelming period stops at some, not stops, but kind of becomes more easier to carry as the kids grow from the first stage.
But you change. I think also that's why I see a lot of anxiety in moms, and I think all of us we want to give our children the best, and we want to also maybe repair things that from our childhood, or we want to have our children have a better life than us in certain ways, or we want to not miss out on a need that they might have. We don't want them to be damaged by life, and that creates huge pressure. The expectations we put on ourselves to be these perfect mothers. And at a certain, after 5, I couldn't be a perfect mother. I couldn't do it all. I couldn't cook well, take care of them well. It's not possible. So I had to stop focusing on that and focusing just on the bond. So that they feel that I love them, and that we had this that we're able to communicate. That became my major focus, and all the rest. We're all different mums also. There's things that we're very good at, and for instance, I don't cook. I always dreamed of being the mum where the kids come home and they smell mummy's cooking, and then later on in years they would say, my mother's this, my mother. It never happened in my house because I cannot cook. It's a disaster. But my kids cook now, so they're the ones who make meals at home. But we discussed it sometimes, all these things that I could not do, but they told me, yeah, but you're so funky, you gave us something else. So they are more gentle towards you than you are towards yourself. So it's letting go. It became easier when I started letting go and accepting that I am who I do my best, and that's it. And focusing on just the relation, the quality of the relation.
Priorities.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your time.
You're
and I
welcome.
really much enjoyed it. Is that if I ever start a podcast, you're definitely going to be the first person I invite to it, because this was very
Please start
joyful.
a podcast. It would be great.
This was very, very joyful for me.
Thank you. Thank you for your interest. I love to talk about what we do.